Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to our course on English 10. And today, what we're going to be doing basically is going through a little more quickly, hopefully, our final short story for this unit. And that is going to be the short story Young Goodman Brown by Nathaniel Hawthorne. Probably our longest story, I think by far, actually, and probably also one of the more complicated ones to understand. Maybe actually a little more complicated even than the bet, in some sense. But I think one of the things that makes this story difficult to understand is the amount of background information that you probably would need in order to kind of fully comprehend this story, I think. Now, what I'm going to do is walk you through that background information that we should know, and also walk us through the general beats of the story. We're not going to actually read the whole story in full here. I want to kind of move a little more quickly and highlight some of the major points and major events, major themes, major lines of this story so that we can kind of get into some of those questions of analysis here. So, what do we start with? As always, let's start with that title, Young Goodman Brown. So, simple terms, simple enough, I seem. So, young, what are the connotations of this term young? Potential, right? We have the notion of potential, we have the notion of ignorance, of kind of sophomoricness, right? Of someone who is naive to the world, doesn't fully understand the world. So I think that's probably the most applicable applicable sense of how we could interpret the word young, especially for this story. Okay, so think of that so far. Now, Goodman. Historically, in its context, in its proper context, Goodman here is essentially just a formal-ish way of saying Mr., right? So it really could be translated young Mr. Brown. Now, why Goodman? Well, of course, because as we're going to see, the stories here referring to a very specific historical context where that sort of language was used regularly. We would call people Goodman or Goody or all that kind of stuff, right? So Mr. or Mrs. In that form. But I think knowing our author, and as we see kind of moving through this story, I think there's probably a pun going on there, right? So good man, right? A good man. Now, if you kind of fast forward into 12th grade English and read the short story, A Good Man is Hard to Find by Flannery O'Connor, you'll understand, and I think we have a video of that on this channel too, you'll kind of understand why the term good man is so fraught with a lot of different interpretations and a lot of different meaning, particularly coming from an author like this. I think Hawthorne is probably doing something with mentioning good man, and we'll come back to that in a minute. Now, next we have the final word, Brown, right? So Hawthorne is really going to help us out in some sense because he's leaning very much into the symbolism, the classical kind of symbolism, universal symbolism that we're familiar with from the beginning of this course, right? From our universal symbols and our materials therein. The term brown, what does that evoke in terms of its symbolic meaning, the term brown? Well, most students jump right to earth, right? It is associated with the earth, with ground, with dirt. It is not extremely good and extremely evil. It's sort of a mixture, right? It's sort of a neutral term, if you want to call it that, right? It's the earth. It's associated with humility. It's associated with perhaps dirtiness, but also, potential, again, linking back to the first term here, the potential for growth. Okay, so all of those meanings are kind of circulating and interweaving themselves in this story so far. Now, Nathaniel Hawthorne. What do we know about Nathaniel Hawthorne? What should we know about Nathaniel Hawthorne? He is an 1800s author. So once again, we need to prepare ourselves for 1800s diction like we saw with Edgar Allan Poe. And he's an American short story writer. And he's a profoundly Christian writer as well. He's very, very interested in religion and religious texts. Okay. Now, he is also, as we're going to see, an enormous critic of the dysfunctions within Christian culture. So, unfortunately for us, and maybe fortunately for some, we really need to be familiar with the religion of Christianity, of how it probably should properly be understood and practiced if we're going to understand Nathaniel Hawthorne's stories and his themes, essentially. So he is a Christian. He is going to be here critiquing a certain sect of Christianity and certain beliefs within Christianity, certain behavior, I should really say, within Christianity. And we need to understand that he's doing that kind of in-house or kind of from within, and saying that, therefore, I am a part of this religion, but I think that these particular ideas are very dysfunctional if we allow them to play themselves out in our religion. Now, which particular form of Christianity is he going to be critiquing? He's going to be critiquing the form of Christianity that we saw emerge and we saw play itself out, if you want, in Puritanism in the 1600s. Okay. So you don't really need to read far. I think it's in the first line. Actually, he sets his story in Salem, Massachusetts. Okay. Now, immediately, our minds might be familiar with the Salem witch trials, which were perpetrated under the kind of rule and dominion of Puritan Christianity, or at least a culture of Puritan Christianity. Okay. So let's back up a minute and let's talk a little bit about Puritanism for our understanding of this story. Puritanism, like I said, is a sect of Christianity. It's a form of Protestantism that essentially places an enormous fixation on, as the name implies, an individual's or a society's purity and their adherence to the Christian religion and Christian teachings, okay, and behavior. And they do this almost to an extreme, I think you could say. They are incredibly focused on maintaining their own moral reputation, their own moral character, avoiding anything that seems like it would be either overtly sinful or something that could lead directly to sinful, potentially sinful behavior or even sinful thoughts. Okay. Now, unfortunately, what happens then is that you have a religious group that essentially shuns anything, or starts to, rather, I should say, shun things that the Bible itself kind of might be seen as actually endorsing. So, the classic example that Nathaniel Hawthorne is known for is a story like The Scarlet Letter, where something like, where it's critiquing Puritan culture and illustrating how Puritans were very suspect of, for example, sexual morality and how to engage in sex and all this kind of stuff. And they diverged from traditional Christian understandings of sex and sexuality in the sense that they thought it was solely supposed to be for making children, and there should be no other source of enjoyment in it. Essentially, that's the only thing. So any enjoyment that we get out of sex is suspect, is sinful, perhaps, or will lead us down the path of sin. So they're very nervous about this sort of stuff. And, it's worth saying, you don't have to go too far in the Bible or just go check out our humanities course to know that's not necessarily, that is not a necessary interpretation of sexuality in Christianity or in Judaism, okay? So the Puritans take that sort of attitude with virtually everything, whether it be clothing and fashion, whether it be the work ethic that they have, whether it be church attendance, all this sort of stuff. Next year, if you're following us, we'll be reading The Crucible, and The Crucible, delves into even more depth as to the dysfunctions of this sort of culture. Now, Nathaniel Hawthorne, like I said, is not a Puritan, but he is a Christian, and he thinks that there's something very, very wrong with the Puritan assumptions that it makes as a religious sect. And I'm curious to see if you guys can already pick up the problem. Puritans are essentially trying to become as pure as they possibly can. And I think they're practicing, if you want the specific term of it, I think it's a form of Pelagianism, if I'm getting that right, which is and correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, please, which is a form of Christianity that basically says that you can, through your own moral actions and practices and adherence to God's principles, you can make yourself essentially perfect and completely perfectly virtuous here on earth. Now, let's hear that. Let's say that. and meditate on that for a minute and our own understandings of Christianity and understand what the major problem is there, why most Christians will reject something like Pelagianism and why most Christians will reject Puritanism and that sort of practice. It's simply because, based on fundamental Christian teachings, human beings suffer from something that you and I might just call, original sin. Or to put it in a more kind of secular term, we suffer from kind of a fundamental imperfection and fundamental limitations on our nature. We are not, completely wise and brilliant. We cannot ever become omniscient, apparently, in this world. We cannot really overcome our fundamental laziness completely, right? We can never really overcome some of our malice and our negative intent completely, right? If you want to list out all 7 deadly sins, we can't ever fully get rid of them. We're always going to be somewhat limited by our sinful nature. That's a fundamental Christian teaching, and even Jewish to an extent. And so Puritanism it has a bit of friction with that belief, because Puritanism is saying, no, we can do this. Well, guys and gals, try and consider what sort of dysfunction that might breed. And again, think even outside of Christianity, think if you accept that premise that human beings are fundamentally not perfect and that we can't ever achieve complete perfection in this world to the point where we're like, totally perfect and godlike. If you don't think that that's possible, why do you think that there is so much danger in someone trying to do it? If someone really, really tried, like a Puritan, to become as perfect as possible, what is dangerous in that? Most of us will point out, well, you're setting yourself up for failure. You're setting extremely high standards on yourself. And what might end up happening, what most of my students see really quickly, is that you start to judge others pretty harshly, or you start to at least become suspect of others who are not abiding by the same practices as you are. There's this element of kind of pride that starts to come into it, and judgment or judgmentalism as a result of you trying to be so perfect, but not really understanding the sins and flaws in yourselves and the inherent kind of trouble that other people will have as well. So Hawthorne is aware of this. And in some sense, that's what this story is fundamentally about. It is about that problem within Puritanism. So that's all we really need to know for Nathaniel Hawthorne. And we'll kind of tease out some more of these beliefs and more of these understandings as we go through. Now, to refer back to this term Goodman here, what is the problem with that name? Or what is the problem or a potential alternative meaning with this title? He may be simply, yes, referencing Goodman as another way to say Mr. That's pretty obvious. But he also might be kind of adding a double entendre or kind of a pun and be saying, this young good man whose name is Brown, right? And he might be questioning us or kind of poking at us, or maybe even making a direct allusion to the Gospels when Jesus asks the rich young man, why do you call me good, right? The rich young man comes to Jesus and says, hey, good teacher, how do you inherit eternal life? Jesus replies not with a direct answer, but actually questions him and says, why do you call me good? None is good but God. And fundamentally kind of pointing out what we just explained, which is the human anthropology in Christianity that says human beings are fundamentally always going to be flawed, at least in this world, right? There's the whole idea of heaven and sanctification, heaven and earth, blah, blah, blah. But at least here in this life, we're going to be always struggling with our sins to some degree. So it's inappropriate to call us, quote unquote, good, at least at the level of goodness that God has, okay? So I think he's referencing something there, right? This young good man, Brown. Okay, so that being said, let's jump right in and start to tease out just a couple of the opening passages here. Young Goodman Brown came forth at sunset into the streets of Salem village, but put his head back after crossing the threshold to exchange a parting kiss with his young wife. And Faith, as the wife was aptly named, thrust her own pretty head into the street, letting the wind play with the pink ribbons of her cap while she called to Goodman Brown. Dearest heart, whispered she, softly and rather sadly, when her lips were close to his ear, prithee, put off your journey until the sunrise, and sleep in your own bed tonight. A lone woman is troubled with such dreams and such thoughts that she is afeared of herself. Sometimes pray, tarry with me. I'm sorry, sometimes. Pray, tarry with me this night, dear husband, all nights in the year. My love and my faith, replied young Goodman Brown. Of all nights in the year, this one night I must tarry away from thee. My journey, as thou callest it, forth and back again, must needs be done twixt now and sunrise. What, my sweet pretty wife, dost thou doubt me already? But we but 3 months married. Then God bless you, said Faith with the pink ribbons. And may you find all well when you come back. Amen, cried Goodman Brown. Say thy prayers, dear Faith, and go to bed at dusk, and no harm will come to thee. Okay, so they leave. So what do we have here? We have the opening, like I said, in Salem Village, Puritan area, where the Salem witch trials took place. And we have this man, young Goodman Brown, leaving his home at sunset, leaving his village at sunset, his town, I should say. And his wife, whose name is Faith, aptly, right, as the as the narrator tells us, hinting again that Nathaniel Hawthorne is very much in the business of providing us pretty overt symbols, right, with the name Young Goodman Brown, with his wife's name Faith, and additionally with her pink ribbons that he's going to reference, I think, over 5 times in this whole story. So Goodman Brown is leaving. He has to go on an errand in the forest, apparently, and that is suspect right off the bat. And she asks him to stay. He's like, no, I'll be back. I'll be back. Okay, do you doubt me already? And she says, no, God bless you. And he goes. Okay. Now, then we get this passage here. He says, poor little Faith, thought he, for his heart smote him. What a wretch am I to leave her on such an errand. She talks of dreams too. Methought as she spoke, there was trouble in her face, as if a dream had warned her what work is to be done tonight. But no, it would kill her to think on it. Well, she's a blessed angel on earth, and after this one night, I'll cling to her skirts and follow her to heaven. With this excellent resolve for the future, Goodman Brown felt himself justified in making more haste on his present evil purpose. He had taken a dreary road darkened by all the gloomiest trees of the forest, which barely stood aside to let the narrow path creep through and closed immediately behind. Okay, so he is saying pretty overtly, and the narrator is saying that he has to go and do something, quote unquote, evil tonight. He has to go do something bad, and it's being done in the forest, right? And he's thinking to himself, he's like, I'll just do this one thing tonight, and then I can cling to Faith, my punning, right? My wife and my actual faith, right? Of Christianity, of Puritanism, and then we can go back to our normal life and go back to heaven, right? Okay, where's he going? He's going into the forest. Now, interesting setting here. We have a lot of descriptions of the gloomy kind of trees here. In this next line, he basically says, what if, as he's kind of passing through the forest, he wonders, who's out there, who's in the forest, right? There's an unknown element there. It could be a devilish Indian. What if the devil himself be at my elbow? All this kind of stuff. Now, this brings up an interesting kind of reference back to our metaphors of life, because look at the setting or the kind of setup here, the metaphorical setup. We have Salem Village, and in Salem Village, we have a Puritan colony, a Puritan culture that prizes itself on safety, kind of internal community and safety and holiness. Notice what that means is that anything outside of our community is seen as less pure, as dangerous. And what is physically, literally outside of the community? It is forest, okay? It is wilderness. It's untamed wilderness. It's chaos. It's darkness. It's the unknown, right? So we have, again, that garden sort of metaphor appearing where we try to enclose ourselves and keep ourselves safe inside something, whether it's safe literally inside of a garden or an enclosed space, or safe within some bounds of our own mind, our own understanding, whatever. So he is venturing outside of this now. He's venturing out into the darkness, into the forest for something evil. We don't know what exactly, okay? As he goes out, he sees what? He beholds the figure of a man in grave and decent attire, seated at the foot of an old tree. The guy gets up, and says what? "You are late, Goodman Brown," he said. "The clock of the Old South was striking as I came through Boston, and that is full 15 minutes agone." "Faith kept me back a while," replied young Goodman Brown, with a tremor in his voice caused by the sudden appearance of this companion, though not wholly unexpected. Okay, so his companion, not unexpected, appears sitting at the base of a tree. He gets up and he greets Goodman Brown, and we get this description of how we are to understand what this guy sort of looks like. "As nearly as could be discerned, the second travel was about 50 years old, apparently in the same rank of life as Goodman Brown, and bearing a considerable resemblance to him, though perhaps more in expression than features. Still, they might have been taken for father and son, and yet, though the elder person was as simply clad as the younger, and as simple in manner too, he had an indescribable air of one who knew the world, and would not have felt abashed at the governor's dinner table or in King William's court, were it possible that his affairs should call him thither. But the only thing about him that could be fixed upon as remarkable was his staff, which bore the likeness of a great black snake, so curiously wrought that it might almost be seen to twist and wriggle itself like a living serpent. This, of course, might have been an ocular deception, assisted by the uncertain light." Okay, so this man appears, looks like Goodman Brown, looks like he's older, an older version of him, knows the world in his appearance, apparently, has this big staff, or apparently a staff that looks like a black serpent. Okay. "Come, Goodman Brown," cried his fellow traveler. "This is a dull pace for the beginning of a journey. Take my staff if you are so soon weary." "Friend," said the other, that is Goodman Brown, exchanging his slow pace for a full stop, "having kept covenant by meeting thee here, it is my purpose now to return whence I came. I have scruples touching the matter thou wouldst of." Okay. Scruples means problems. So he's like, "Come on, let's go. Let's keep going." And Goodman Brown says, "Hold on. I think I want to kind of go home. I think I want to turn around. I have some problems. I have some scruples with thee." "Sayest thou so?" replied he of the serpent, smiling apart. "Let us walk on, nevertheless, reasoning as we go. And if I convince thee not, thou shalt turn back. But we are but a little way in the forest yet." Too far," exclaimed Goodman Brown. Okay. So at this point, we see what? They're going to do something bad. We already know this. This guy is very clearly adopting the role of the tempter, of the instigator, right? He wants to kind of seduce Goodman Brown into going further and further into the forest. The narrator refers to him as he of the serpent. He has a serpentine staff. He was seated at the base of a tree. Ladies and gentlemen, it doesn't take, Sherlock Holmes to kind of put 3 and 2 together and figure out who is this man. I think it's pretty clear this man is meant to be the devil. I think this is Satan, right? He's seated at the base of a tree with a serpent. I think there's some clear allusion being made there, but tree and snake, right? There's the Garden of Eden reference there. This similarity that he looks to him, right? That's kind of interesting. We'll get back to that soon. And his, invitation to keep walking with him and to reason with him as we go. This, temptation to let's keep talking and let's keep kind of debating, whether or not we should keep going all the while we are just kind of slowly going further and further, right? I think that's very clearly, again and again, it's going to be confirmed soon, but it's like these are the first major hints that Goodman Brown is walking in the forest with the devil. Okay, so he's leaving that place of safety, apparent safety, going out into the devil, or into the devil's kind of dominion out here. Okay, now major assumption that's pretty unhealthy here. Goodman Brown assumed that assumes, along with Puritanism, that within the confines, within the quote unquote garden of a Puritan culture, everything was safe and pure, whereas outside of it, not so much. That's where evil dwells. Evil is outside of our society. It is not inside. It's not inside our society or inside us, heaven forfend, right? This is an enormously false assumption and an enormously dangerous one, okay? And why? Because again, as we're going to see as this story progresses, one of the fundamental teachings of Christianity, and I think of any really, strong moral philosophy or moral understanding of the world, is that dysfunction and evil exists first and foremost within ourselves. Okay, that's where it needs to be addressed and conquered first and foremost and consistently before we point fingers and create or point to an external source or an external scapegoat to blame on the evils of the world, right? Blame yourself first, or look at yourself first, at least. So additionally, we could talk about, like, why is this guy, inviting him to reason, right? That's just a kind of tactic of the devil, right? Like, let's keep talking, let's keep discussing this. When in reality, again, if we're looking at this through a very Christian perspective, what is the proper attitude towards the devil and the devil's temptation? God and the Bible don't say you necessarily need to reason with him. The simple indictment is to don't follow him. Okay, don't do it. It's actions that we must be following. It's practice. It's the practice of not listening to the devil. It's the practice of rejecting him and in action and kind of doing good instead. It's not about debate. It's not about reason and intellect. Okay, intellect is something that the devil likes to use because, of course, the devil, in Christianity, in Christian mythology or stories, is a hyper intellect, okay, is hyper intellectual, and that we could never hope to fully out debate him. Okay, that would be really quite difficult. So don't try, and just be good. Have faith, have trust in God instead. Okay. So Goodman says, too far, too far. My father never went into the woods on such an errand, nor his father before him. We have been a race of honest and good Christians since the days of the martyrs. And shall I be the first of the name of Brown that ever took this path and kept? So notice he's saying, I shouldn't be here. My family's better than this, right? We're good people. We never kept such company, thou wouldst sayest, observed the elder person, interrupting his pause. Well said, Goodman Brown. I have been as well acquainted with your family as with ever a one among the Puritans. And that's no trifle to say. I helped your grandfather, the constable, when he lashed the Quaker woman so smartly through the streets of Salem. And it was I that brought your father a pitch pine knot kindled at my own hearth to set fire to an Indian village in King Philip's war. They were my good friends both, and many a pleasant walk have we had along this path and returned merrily after midnight. I would fain be friends with you for their sake. Okay. So he says, what? Oh, you're mentioning your wonderful family that never kept my company. Well, actually, I know your family very well. And the examples he gives are basically when his father and grandfather did very immoral things, right? I knew them. I helped them with those. I think directly, overtly, and somewhat symbolically referencing the fact that what? That his family has sins, has sinful behavior in the past. They're not as good of people as Goodman Brown thinks. Okay, that's the first kind of chip in Goodman Brown's view of the world that's beginning to be chipped away here. If it be as thou sayest, replied Goodman Brown, I marvel they never spoke of these matters, or verily I marvel not, seeing that the least rumor of the sort would have driven them from New England. We are a people of prayer and good works too, to boot, and abide no such wickedness. Wickedness or not, said the traveler with a twisted staff. I have a very general acquaintance here in New England. The deacons of many a church have drunk the communion wine with me. The selectmen of divers towns make me their chairman, and a majority of the great and general court are firm supporters of my interests. The governor and I too, but these are state secrets. Okay, so the devil very clearly saying, I am associated with everyone in New England, okay, everyone of those higher courts, right, and in politics, and in the church. Can this be so? Said Goodman Brown with a state of amazement at his undisturbed companion. Howbeit I have nothing to do with the governor and the council. They have their own ways, and are no rule of a simple husband like me. But were I to go on with thee, how should I meet the eye of that good old man, our minister at Salem Village? Oh, his voice would make me tremble both Sabbath day and lecture day. So he's saying, okay, whatever. Well, I'm not involved with those people. I'm just a simple husband. And if I were to keep going with you, doing whatever it is we're doing, how am I going to meet the face of my pastor in the morning, basically? How am I going to look him in the eye? And implying what? He's such a good man. He's so much better than me, right? And I don't want to be, feel guilty and feel judged by him. Thus far, the elder traveler had listened with with due gravity, but burst into a fit of irrepressible mirth, shaking himself so violently. Okay, so he laughs. He bursts out laughing. Well, go on, Goodman Brown, go on, but prithee, don't kill me with laughing. He says, well, then, to end the matter at once, there is faith. I would break my heart, or I would break her little heart, and I would rather break my own. Nay, if that be the case, Ian, go thy ways, Goodman Brown. I would not, for 20 old women like the one hobbling before us, that they should come to any harm. Okay, so he says what? He laughs at Goodman Brown. Like you're terrified of being what judged by your pastor. And he's thinking, what? I mean, what's that implying? Is like, yeah, your pastor knows me too, and your pastor has walked with me too. So again, underlining Goodman Brown's ignorance. Now, here we see another woman coming along. Goodman Brown kind of steps aside because he doesn't want to be seen by this woman, right? He's very afraid of being seen out here with the devil at all. Understandably, but even more understandably in the sort of hyper Puritan culture that he's in, that really puts a big emphasis on outward appearances of goodness. Okay, so he goes on, or goes away, but he kind of can still see the path, and they keep going. And he turns aside, and what do we get? The traveler keeps going, kind of up behind the old woman. It says, she meanwhile was making the best of her way with singular speed for so aged a woman, and mumbling some indistinct words, a prayer doubtless as she went. The traveler put forth his staff and touched her withered neck with what seemed the serpent's tails. Okay, so the devil kind of goes up behind her and pokes her in the back of the neck. The devil, screamed the pious old lady. Ah, then Goody Cloyce knows her old friend, observed the traveler, confronting her. Okay, so I love that. Again, pun. She goes, the devil, right? Like that basically means that is a kind of, again, once again, a pun, right? Like the devil means like what the devil. It means like what the hell is kind of a way of translating that. But it also literally can mean, oh, is it the devil? And what does he respond with? Oh, Goody Cloyce, Mrs. Cloyce, you know your old friend then. Okay. So they know each other. Goody Cloyce and the devil. Ah, forsooth, and it is your worship indeed, cried the old dame. Yea, truly it is, and in the very image of my old gossip, Goodman Brown, the grandfather of the silly fellow that now is. Okay, confirming that she sees the devil, and she's like, oh, and you're in the form of Goodman Brown's grandfather. Okay, that silly boy. But would your worship believe it? My broomstick hath strangely disappeared, stolen, as I suspect, by that unhanged witch, Goody Clory, and that too, when I was all anointed with the juice of small and chingfoil and wolfsbane, mingled with the fine wheat and fat of a newborn babe, said the shape of old Goodman Brown. Ah, your worship knows the recipe, cried the old lady, cackling loud. So, as I was saying, being all ready for the meeting and no horse to ride on, I made up my mind to foot it. For they tell me there is a nice young man to be taken into communion tonight, but now your own worship will lend me your arm, and we shall be there in a twinkling. Okay, so this lady, Goody Corey, or Goody Cloyce rather, is a witch. It's very clearly a witch, and she knows the devil. And they kind of reference all these like gross, witch potions that they make to kind of the levitation ointments, right? Grotesque stuff, with the fat of a newborn babe. Which if you don't know, go watch the movie The Witch, where you see that happen, where a witch murders a baby and creates an ointment out of its body and then rubs herself with it. It's disgusting, right? She's involved in these horrible, just abominable satanic practices. And she goes and flies away because he drops her his staff. And what do we get? Goodman Brown comes up out of the forest now, comes up to the traveler, the devil, and says, that old woman taught me my catechism, said young Goodman Brown, said the young man. And there was a world of meaning in this simple comment. Okay. He realizes that is essentially my catechist, my catechist teacher. That is my Sunday school teacher. Doing what to his understanding of the people that he respected? First it was his family, then it was the general courts and the upper powers of Salem Village or of New England. Then it's the pastor, and then now it's the woman who taught him his catechist. All of these people are involved with the devil. He says, friend, my mind is made up. Not another step will I budge on this errand. What if a wretched old woman do choose to go to the devil when I thought she was going to heaven? Is that any reason why I should quit my dear faith and go after her? You will think better of it by and by, his acquaintance said. Sit here and rest yourself a while, and when you feel like moving again, there is my staff to help you along. Okay, so he disappears. And Goodman Brown sits here. He hears two people more coming, and we can kind of skip over this. We can see that it's Deacon Gookin and someone else, and they're basically talking about that, we're on our way to this devil meeting, essentially, and there's going to be Indians, and there's going to be all these other kind of people there. And there's also going to be a young woman brought into communion tonight. Okay, obvious foreshadowing here. What is this? That there's some kind of dark satanic communion that there's a young man being brought into, probably Goodman Brown, and there's a young woman being brought into, probably Faith, right? So Goodman Brown hears this and he just is, aghast at these two churchly and stately people coming to such a horrible thing, or coming to such a horrible meeting. Okay. And he kind of goes on, he kind of goes back and forth, and he says, with heaven above and faith below, I will yet stand firm against the devil. Okay? He sits here, and he has one of the strangest parts of the story. He kind of looks up, and he hears, or he looks up at the sky, and he sees that there's a cloud coming kind of onward in the same direction where the other men were going. And in that crowd, or in that cloud, he hears the voices and kind of yelling and screaming of saints and sinners that he knows in his town. And then among them is also a woman that he understands as Faith. He says, Faith, shouted Goodman Brown in a voice of agony and desperation that echoes in the forest, mocking him, Faith, Faith, as if bewildered wretches were seeking her all through the wilderness. So she screams, and the cloud kind of goes by, right? Whatever that was, whatever weird vision that was, out of the sky falls the pink ribbon of Faith, okay? Now he grabs it and he says, my faith is gone, he cried after one stupefied moment. There is no good on earth, and sin is but a name. Come, devil, for to thee is this world given. Okay. What does this mean? Goodman Brown is being shown here that everyone is involved with the devil, with sin, if you want, and he takes this to mean what? There is no good on earth. Sin's but a name, right? We're all deep in sin. Come, devil, for to thee this world is given. He understands this, but then his reaction to it is what? And maddening with despair, and so laughing aloud, did Goodman Brown grasp the staff and set forth. And he kind of just runs and screams through the forest, laughing and screaming and kind of taunting everything, and kind of just, going full balls to the wall, kind of just going nuts and throwing himself into this demoniac-like stupefaction. Okay. Now, he then comes upon the meeting place, and he sees that, there's like 4 pine trees that are kind of on fire, that there's like an altar, like a stone altar in the middle. There's tons of people there, a grave and dark clad company, he says. And there is a figure in the middle of the procession at the altar, who very clearly, as we're going to see, is the devil. And they sing this hymn of like dark, evil, sinful stuff. And out of the voice of that figure at the front says what? Bring forth the converts. At the word, Goodman Brown stepped forth from the shadow of the trees and approached the congregation, with whom he felt a loathful brotherhood. By the sympathy of all that was wicked in his heart, he could have well nigh sworn the shape of his own dead father beckoned him to advance, looking downward with a smoke over the smoke wreath. Okay, so he kind of sees figures that look like his father, kind of edging him forward. And then what? While a woman with dim features of despair threw out her hand to warn him back. Was it his mother? But he had no power to retreat one step nor resist. Okay, so it's like what, this vision of his mother kind of telling him, no, 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 don't do this, don't go. So they come up, and the figure says, welcome, my children, said the dark figure, to the communion of your race. Ye have found thus young your nature and your destiny, my children. Look behind you. They turned, flashing forth, as it were, in a sheet of flame. The fiend worshippers were seen. The smile of welcome gleamed darkly on every visage. There, resumed the sable form, the devil, that is, are all whom ye reverence from youth. Ye deemed them holier than yourselves, and shrank from your own sin, contrasting it with their lives of righteousness and prayerful aspirations heavenwards. Yet here are they all in my worshiping assembly. In other words, the devil is making everybody here, everyone in Salem and the surrounding towns, basically say, look, everyone, look at who's here with me. It's everyone, including not abstaining, of course, including the people that you thought were saints, that you thought were good in your lives, and that you judged yourself kind of like against, right? He says, "This night it will be granted to you to know their secret deeds, how hoary, bearded elders of the church have whispered wanton words to young maids of their households, how many a woman, eager for widow's weeds, has given her husband a drink at bedtime and let him sleep his last sleep in her bosom, how beardless youths have made haste to inherit their father's wealth, and how fair damsels, blush not, sweet ones, have dug little graves in the garden and bidden me, the sole guest, to an infant's funeral." So he's like, I'm going to show you all of the sins that you've all committed, right? I'm going to show you how all of these creepy old guys in the church have kind of like flirted with girls. I'm going to show you how what old women have basically poisoned their husbands. I'm going to show you, or like, sped their husbands towards death. I'm going to show you how young men have tried to inherit their father's wealth, by pushing him towards death as well. I'm going to show you how young girls essentially killed their babies, right? All these dark and horrible things. He says, "By the sympathy of your human hearts for sin, ye shall send out all places, whether in church, bedchamber, street, field, or forest, where crime has been committed, and shall exult to behold the whole earth, one stain of guilt, one mighty blood spot. Far more than this, it shall be yours to penetrate in every bosom the deep mystery of sin, the fountain of all wicked arts, in which inexhaustible supplies more evil impulses than human power, and then my power at its utmost can make manifest in deeds. And now, my children, look upon each other." So he's basically saying, I'm going to show you that this world is nothing but sinfulness. It's full of sin. It's one blood spot, basically. They did so. They all look at each other. And of course, Goodman Brown sees that the girl standing next to him is who? It's Faith, right? And he says, "Lo, there ye stand, my children," said the figure, in a deep and solemn, almost tone, almost sad, with its despairing awfulness, as if his once angelic nature could yet mourn for our miserable race. "Depending upon one another's hearts, ye had still hope that virtue were not all a dream. Now are ye undeceived. Evil is the nature of mankind. Evil must be your only happiness. Welcome again, my children, to the communion of your race." Okay? We're all evil, essentially, is what he is saying. Now, he then kind of invites Faith and Goodman Brown up to the altar, and he's going to baptize them in what looks like either blood or liquid fire. And what does Goodman Brown say right before they're about to do it? He says, "Faith, Faith," cried the husband, "look up to heaven and resist the wicked one." Okay, resist, don't do this. And then what do we get? We get this passage. "Whether Faith obeyed, he knew not. Hardly had he spoken when he found himself amid a calm night of solitude, listening to a roar of wind which died heavily away through the forest. He staggered against the rock and felt it chill and damp, while a hanging twig that had been on fire, besprinkled with his cheek with the coldest dew." So wait a minute. It's like he cries out and then snap, everything's gone. He's in the forest. There's no fire. There's no congregation. Everything's still cold and wet. There's no fire. What the heck? The next morning, young Goodman Brown came slowly into the streets of Salem village, starting around him like a bewildered man. He sees the minister. He sees Deacon Gookin. He sees Goody Cloyce. He sees all these people, and he kind of like shrinks from them. He's like disgusted by all of them, right? And what? He sees Faith with the pink ribbons gazing anxiously forth and bursting into such joy at the sight of him that she skipped along the streets and almost kissed her husband for the whole village. But Goodman Brown looked sternly and sadly into her face and passed on without a greeting. Why? Why is he behaving this way? Because he thinks he saw them all engaging in this satanic, deeply immoral, deeply sinful sort of practice. Had Goodman Brown, as the last paragraph says, fallen asleep in the forest and only dreamed a wild dream of a witch meeting? Be it so if you will, but alas, it was a dream of evil omen for Goodman Brown. A stern, a sad, a darkly meditative, a distrustful, if not a desperate man did he become from the night of that fearful dream. On the Sabbath day, when the congregation were singing a holy psalm, he could not listen because an anthem of sin rushed loudly upon his ear and drowned all the blessed strain. when the minister spoke from the pulpit with the power and fervid eloquence, and with his hand on the open Bible of the sacred truths of our religion, and of saint-like lives and triumphs and deaths, and of the future of bliss or misery unutterable, then did Goodman Brown turn pale, dreading lest the roof should thunder down upon the grave blasphemer and his hearers. Often awaking suddenly at night, he shrank from the bosom of faith, and at morning or eventide, when the family knelt down at prayer, he scowled and muttered to himself, and gazed sternly at his wife, and turned away. And when he had lived long and was borne to his grave, a hoary corpse, followed by Faith, an aged woman, and children and grandchildren, a goodly procession, besides neighbors not a few, they carved no hopeful verse upon his tombstone, for his dying hour was gloom. Okay, so in other words, he goes on to live a miserable, distrustful, dark life. Okay, that's the story. What the heck just happened, right? What's going on here? Let's take a look at the questions first, okay? First, number one, what are the symbols associated with Brown's wife at the start of the story? Pink ribbons, repeated over and over again. The pink ribbons, Faith with the pink ribbons, Faith with the pink ribbons. What's up with the pink ribbons? Pink, symbolism. Red and white together. So you could say pink femininity, right? Obviously. I don't think that's what he's thinking of, probably. I think he's probably thinking of that fusion between scarlet and white. Scarlet, obviously, being a symbol, probably for him in this instance, of sin, white of purity, a mixture of sin and purity. In the Christian context, referencing what? Human nature, the nature of humanity. Yes, we are sinners. Yes, we are imperfect and stained, but we are also made in the image of God and have the ability to at least do some good and try to strive towards goodness. So what is Brown getting ready to do at the start of the story? He's going into the forest, okay? He's going into the forest to do some evil errand with the devil, apparently, or with witchcraft, sure. Number three, where does Brown go and who does he meet there? Obviously, he goes into the forest, right? We talked about that, the symbolism of this, to meet the devil. The devil is described as being very familiar with Goodman Brown and very much like him, at least in appearance. And this minor conflict, right, that he has scruples and that he is kind of shocked that, he's so related to his family. This is a shock to him. And that's kind of also number six. What is Brown so shocked about after speaking with the traveler? All of that. He's shocked that, wait a minute, everyone is involved with you. Everyone that I know effectively is involved with you. They see Goody Cloyce, right? Is it Goody Cloyce? I think. One of they see his catechist, right? They see his catechist teacher. And what effect does that have on him? It shocks him. It demoralizes him. It makes him, doubt everyone around him. What does Goodman Brown hear in the sky? He hears all of the people in town basically bringing faith to this devil meeting, essentially. And what does he find? He finds all of the people of Salem and the surrounding towns congregated here with the devil. And the essential claim that the speaker, the devil, makes at that assembly is that you're going to see tonight that every single one of you is evil, fundamentally, that evil is the nature of humanity, only evil. How does the vision of the assembly conclude, and what question does it leave Goodman Brown with? It concludes with it just kind of him like, quote unquote, waking up or it all just disappearing. So we're not actually sure if it was real. And it leaves him with that question too. Was this actually real? Was this legitimate? And apparently he at least somewhat thinks that it is. And this is the main point here, guys. Number 13, how does his life continue and conclude after this, and why? Why does he live such a miserable life after this? What is Hawthorne trying to say here? He lives this miserable life because he loses his relationship with faith and with everyone else. He no longer trusts anyone else. He no longer trusts his wife. He thinks that they are all evil, essentially. And why? I think you have to say because he was young, naive, and had very naive and simplistic and very puritanical ideas of what goodness was. Like goodness is just the appearance of goodness, is just kind of the outward, simple, cloistered version of goodness. And when he is exposed to even the idea that, wait a minute, someone might have that there could be actually hidden evil in people, that there could be kind of like some deeper, universal evil among people. Wait, what? That basically makes him completely lose his trust in everyone. Okay, lose his faith, both literally his wife's faith, both literally his faith in humanity, and his Christian faith as well. He loses it all. And it's because he had this incredibly dysfunctional and naive view of human nature and of the world. So what I usually tell my students is you kind of got to understand Goodman Brown as like a very, very sheltered kid, right? Someone who's never really been exposed to human dysfunction outside of themselves. And as a result, you kind of get exposed to a little bit of it, and it then traumatizes you because you then develop extreme trust issues, and you no longer think that anyone is trustworthy. Well, what kind of critique is Nathaniel Hawthorne making here about Puritanism? I think it's pretty clear that he's making the critique that fundamentally, if you try to practice Puritanism, you're going to fall into this trap of not fully understanding human nature, including your own. And that's going to really harm your relationships with all other people. Okay. So, in contrast, what do we get? Go back to the first question. We get this recurring symbol in both the character of Faith with her name and everything, but also with the colors that she's associated with her, with this pink color. What's going on with the pink ribbons, the pink ribbons, the pink ribbons? It's, I think, clearly Hawthorne trying to remind the readers and Goodman Brown of what? Of true human nature and anthropology in Christianity, which is that, yes, we do have a sinful nature. Yes, it is part of our nature. Part is the key word. Okay. The devil at the congregation says evil is the only nature, right? Is this true? No, it's not, at least according to Christianity, right? It's not. Human beings are a amalgamation, a kind of mix of good and evil, very much like the color brown, right? You are of the earth. You are, a little bit of God and a little bit of the devil and a little bit of everything, or kind of a little bit of sin, a little bit of the earth, all this kind of stuff. So he doesn't understand that. He loses his understanding of that fundamental truth, okay? And as a result, he can't have a proper relationship with anybody. He's judging everyone so intensely. He's basically thinking that everyone has some really dark skeletons, in their closet, and he just can't connect with them as a result. Now, why is that dysfunctional? Okay, why is that bad? Because, like I tell my students, do we all have skeletons in our closet? Absolutely. Okay, some are bigger than others. Okay, we tend to accrue them as we go through life, of course. Does this mean that we should then look at everyone with incredible suspicion and think that we're all kind of like crazy, like Hannibal Lecter, like figures, like we're all just evil underneath? I don't think so. I think that that's incredibly, again, harmful to your understanding with society and with other people. Because no, some people very much will have some skeletons, some things that they're ashamed of or they're embarrassed of, but they are fundamentally also trying to be good. I think that that's a fair assessment of people. And if you want to look at this from a Christian perspective, like I think Hawthorne is, he's basically saying that, yes, everyone has sins, everyone has problems, but they also have goodness too. And that you need to try to put a little bit of trust in people. You need to have some faith in them to some degree, okay? Because if you don't, then you're going to never have a true relationship or a true good relationship with anybody. And also, by the way, you need to be attentive. And I think this is kind of an underlying point of the whole story. One of the underlying things that goes amiss, that people kind of miss in this whole story is Goodman Brown is sitting around judging everyone for the sins in his past and kind of their apparent false presentation to the world. Well, if I read the story correctly, I recall only one person beginning, or at least the first person that began this journey into the forest was Goodman Brown. So he forgets, I think, that among the sinful congregation of witches and all this kind of stuff, he was on his way into that group as well. Okay, he was. Now, what he was trying to resist a little bit. He was trying to kind of, go back and forth a little bit. So what does he think? He thinks that, well, that makes me better than everyone somehow, some way, possibly. But again, I think that's another slight point of criticism and point of education that Hawthorne is making to us, which is that we can't judge everyone so harshly without judging ourselves. Okay, talk about like, direct Christian teaching. I think Jesus says what? That you will be judged by God based on how you judge others. Okay, so if you don't forgive anybody, what's going to be, God's going to kind of hold you to the same standards. So, interpret that how you will, but I mean, we see it playing out here. Goodman Brown, doesn't forgive anyone of, by the way, uncertain sins, of potential sins in their past, and he never seems to turn that criticism back towards himself and think, well, wait a minute, I was doing that too. And then he might as well just ask himself to be a little more healthy. Well, does that mean that I'm completely untrustworthy? Maybe, maybe not. I think that that's the problem here, is that he's totally just distorted and twisted his relationships with people. He can't trust anyone here. Okay. So a lot of different ways we could interpret that story, a lot of different ways we could articulate what the dysfunction at the end of it is, essentially. Okay. So that's young Goodman Brown. Like I said, a little bit of a complex story, simply because of the level of background information you need to have for religion and for Puritanism and all this kind of stuff. So that is the end of our short story unit. Now, I'm not going to have another video on the kind of the final assessment or the final assignment for this unit. Basically, all it is an open essay where I ask you to select one of those 4 short stories that we read: The Bet, Harrison Bergeron, Mask of the Red Death, or Young Goodman Brown, and simply write a thematic analysis of that story where you tell me, hey, here's the theme of the story, here's how the author illustrates it. Okay, so that's pretty much it. I usually don't kind of like to linger too long on short stories in general, and at least in this particular class, because they're meant to thrust us forward and kind of get our what would you call it, our comprehension wheels all greased up and ready to go and warmed up so that we can get into our next unit, which is Antigone. Okay, so stay tuned for that one. That's what we're going to jump into next, another Greek story, except this time it's a Greek play. Now, in the meantime, I will see you next time. Have a fantastic day. Thank you again.